Let's start. Good afternoon. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues. Welcome to today's side event entitled Preventing and Managing Nuclear Crisis in the 21st Century. Hosted here at the United Nations headquarters and also live streamed on UN Web TV. I hope you can see and hear us around the world. My name is Reto Wollenmann. I serve as the deputy head of the section on arms control, disarmament and cybersecurity at the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs. And I think we're here because in recent years we've observed increasingly complex and fragile security environments, rising tensions, rising geopolitical tensions and growing mistrust among key actors have contributed to drastic deterioration of the arms control landscape. Those developments have significantly elevated nuclear risks and the risk of an escalation, a nuclear escalation, whether intentional or accidental. In such precarious international context, upholding the nuclear taboo and reducing nuclear risks remain the call of the day. It is imperative that we work together to prevent that escalations could spiral out of control. Today's side event aims at exploring how we can respond to these developments and look towards the future. We will reflect on past risk reduction efforts that have proven effective, and we'll consider how they can be adapted, strengthened, and perhaps modernized. And this includes, of course, dialogue, a lot of dialogue, enhancing crisis prevention mechanisms and building on habits of cooperation, particularly among the nuclear-armed states. Following opening remarks from two key supporters of nuclear risk reduction, Germany and Switzerland, we will hear from our expert speakers representing the Institute for Security and Technology and the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, VCDNP. Let me now first invite the co-sponsors of the event to offer their opening remarks. And first, I'm pleased to give the floor to Ambassador Susanne Riegraf, Deputy Federal Government Commissioner for Disarmament, Non-Proliferation and Arms Control, Germany. Susanne, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Reto, and a warm welcome also on behalf of the federal government of Germany and by myself to the panelists and to the distinguished audience. Reducing the risks of nuclear conflict is a matter of urgency. And I think you have all heard that in many references to nuclear risk during the last 2 days of the general debate. It is very difficult to assess the likelihood or probability of an unintended nuclear incident or accident or a nuclear escalation to happen. I had the privilege to have an encounter with Senator Sam Nunn yesterday, where he dared to give percentages, and I think he said one very remarkable sentence that I also want to share with this broader group here. He said that there was no unintended nuclear escalation for the last 75 years. Is also largely, but also not exclusively, due to the fact that risk reduction measures have been implemented. They have not been there from the very beginning, but they have been implemented and they have had their contribution in avoiding unintended escalation. And I think that's something very remarkable. It can never be the causality, of course, can not easily be established, but I think it makes sense and is easily understood by all of us. Implementing risk reduction measures thus can and do make a difference to the security of all of us. And as we live, as Reto has said, in times of a very difficult security environment, the danger of the nuclear risks and nuclear tensions have become very concrete to all of us, especially to those of us who live in Europe. We therefore, I think, are all jointly bound by the shared interest in reducing the risks of nuclear conflict and preventing nuclear war, conflict, or catastrophe, which would have global implications to all of us. We are faced with high uncertainties about new developments and constellations in this rapidly developing international environment. And these new developments, some of them not only political but also technological, directly impact our security and stability in our regions and also on the global level. Uncertainties are also brought about by technologies, new and so far unknown challenges in new theaters and new disguises, such as, for example, outer space, cyber, and artificial intelligence. And in the light of these challenges and their impact on how we define and operationalize risk reduction, we are grateful for the work, the ideas, recommendations, and proposals put forward by academia and think tank, and today, and in this particular case, by the VCDNP and the Institute for Security and Technology on kind of reshaping risk reduction to make it fit for purpose. I want to make two last general points on risk reduction, which are fairly clear. First, risk reduction primarily helps to avoid unintended escalation or conflict based on misperception or miscalculation. It does not avoid, of course, an intended nuclear war, should there ever be such an intention. So it's not a guarantee against everything. That should be clear to us. And secondly, the fact that risk reduction helps to avoid unintended escalation might exactly be the reason for the growing acceptance of addressing risk reduction in the international community and in the NPT community. Risk reduction offers policy solutions responding to various different security needs, decoupled from geopolitical competition, tensions, and irrespective of particular security perceptions. My country, Germany, together with Switzerland and many countries assembled in this room, will continue its engagement in reducing the risk of nuclear conflict in the framework of the Stockholm Initiative, of CEND, and in the context of the NPT. And I won't close before using the opportunity to draw your attention on a working paper on reducing the risk of nuclear conflict that we, a cross-regional group of 17 countries, including also, of course, my Swiss co-chair, have submitted to this PrepCom. And hereby, I give the floor to Reto or directly to Julien. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susanne, for setting the scene, and also thanks to you and your team for the hard work on risk reduction and the excellent cooperation. As you said, next we will hear from Ambassador Julien Thöni. He's the Swiss ambassador, the permanent representative to the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. Julien, over to you.
Thank you very much, Reto. Excellencies, dear colleagues, friends, it's a pleasure to be together with you this afternoon. And let me first begin to thank you all for taking the time in a very busy week to attend this side event. We are in midway in this week, and we have already noticed that there is much to do, notably on the question of nuclear risk reduction. It is very encouraging to see such a strong engagement. So for over 1 decade, nuclear risk reduction has been one of the key pillars of Switzerland's nuclear disarmament and arms control policy. In the lead up to the 2022 NPT review conference, and in close collaboration with Germany and other members of the Stockholm Initiative, we developed a comprehensive package of proposals on risk reduction. This included declaratory measures, practical steps, and a process-oriented approach for advancing this discussion within the NPT cycles. Although the 9th Review Conference ultimately failed to produce a consensus final document, nuclear risk reduction gained significant momentum both within and beyond that process. As we now move through the current NPT cycle toward 2026, Switzerland, together with partners from nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states, continue to advocate for progress on this agenda. Earlier proposals remain on the table, and importantly, support for the various risk reduction approaches has also grown. Later this week, you will hear a joint statement from a broad cross-regional group of states, a statement that is already supported by very broadly, and which remains open for additional signatories. As Susanne mentioned just now, a joint working paper 41, has been submitted offering concrete recommendation for taking forward the topic of reducing the risk of nuclear conflict. Switzerland's continued engagement on nuclear risk reduction is guided by 3 core considerations. First, the recognition that the humanitarian, environmental, economic, and political consequences of any use of nuclear weapons would be global. No country would be spared. In the face of such a catastrophic risk, we are all in the same boat. Regardless of a country's nuclear status, alliance commitments, or security doctrine, everyone has a shared interest in reducing nuclear risks. Secondly, our concern is driven by the worsening geopolitical context. In such a fragile environment with increased tension and mistrust, we must all work together to uphold the nuclear taboo and prevent any form of nuclear escalation, whether deliberate or accidental. Precisely in times of heightened strain, we need for effective risk reduction to become even more critical. Third, we are firmly convinced that risk reduction and disarmament are mutually reinforcing. Pending the achievement of complete nuclear disarmament, which is, of course, one of our shared goals, implementing risk reduction measures is not optional. It is essential. This linkage is clearly reflected in Action 5 of the 2010 NPT Action Plan, which underscores the complementarity nature of both objectives. Today's side event gives us a valuable opportunity to explore these ideas in greater depth, including the technical and conceptual aspect of crisis management in the 21st century. I look forward to the insights of our distinguished panelists and speakers from academia and civil society who have been instrumental in shaping this discourse. Thank you very much, and the floor is back to you, Reto.
Thank you both, Susanne and Julien, for these introductory remarks. We now turn the floor over to our panel with 4 distinguished experts. I think in the interest of time, I will not read out their full, very impressive biographies, but rest assured, we're in good hands. And many of you, of course, have met them and followed their work over many years. We begin with Sahil Shah, to my right. Sahil is a senior policy officer at the Institute for Security and Technology, and he is one of the co-authors of the paper that we're about to discuss. This was a paper jointly developed with the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. Sahil also serves as an advisor to the Swiss NPT delegation. It's great to have you on the team, Sahil. Sahil will set the scene, I think, by offering reflections on the broader strategic context, and he will particularly focus on P5 dynamics and big power dynamics. Please, over to you, Sahil.
Great. Thank you, Reto. And thank you also to Julien and Susanne for your ongoing support. It's a privilege to be here with all of you to discuss the urgent need for progress on nuclear risk reduction. This is not just because the 5 nuclear weapon states under the treaty have a responsibility under the NPT, but also because they are the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, which gives them an additional responsibility to uphold peace and security. As Reto mentioned, I'm wearing multiple hats here today, but today I'm speaking in my personal capacity. I'm drawing from outreach to both nuclear and non-nuclear weapons states, as well as giving you some insights from the P5 process, and also the multilateral Track 1 effort led by Switzerland, Germany, Sweden, and others. That's the effort that led to the NPT working paper that was tabled yesterday. And I urge you all to not only read it, but for delegations to consider endorsing it between now and the review conference. Risk reduction lies at the heart of the NPT, and it has to be energized by all. It can't be just dismissed as a distraction. It'll take all of us shining a light on the gaps and proposing solutions to make real progress. But what is progress? When we talk about risk, what do we measure against? What is a unit of risk? In a moment where deeper arms control seems politically stalled, the world will expect to see and feel a difference. So what does success look like? Dialogue, trust building, mutual understanding are all vital foundations, but we also need direction. Risk reduction is a process, and the process itself has value, but it must point towards outcomes. And this is what our collective work here between all of our governments and institutions has tried to do. Act as a North Star that we need to be constantly moving towards. Sometimes movement might be slow, but a lack of any movement is simply irresponsible and reckless. This side event, co-hosted by Switzerland and Germany, and also IST and VCDNP, is not just about our organizations having shared funding sources. Our work complements each other. At IST, we've been developing a modern, encrypted, survivable multilateral communication system called Catalink that could be made available to nuclear decision makers. It's unacceptable that nuclear-armed leaders lack the ability to communicate under all circumstances, especially in degraded technical environments. Sylvia will speak more on this effort, but I emphasize that this is not just theoretical. To steal a line from President Trump, we don't just have concepts of plans. We are prototyping and we're assessing resilience and feasibility for what something like this could look like. Our recent VCDNP paper complements this, looking further ahead. As one P5 official put it to me, the 2020s in my mind is a decade of transition, a decade of a lot of mess, understanding a lot of changing geopolitics, changing technologies. If we end the decade in a good place where we can start introducing things like concrete risk reduction measures and pathways, that for me will be a big geopolitical win. So this is not about necessarily rushing to agree to some sort of measures between now and the 2025 review conference, in my view, but it's about setting up the P5 for success by creating a work plan, figuring out what measures to dig deeper on so that in our next NPT review cycle, there can be more intensive work regardless of what's happening politically. Yes, progress feels difficult right now. Russia in particular has made it clear that it doesn't want to continue P5 discussions on risk reduction. But the talks held until now have actually shown that the P5 share some perceptions of risk, even if they differ on the causes and the drivers of said risks. That's something to build on. Even if no new commitments are possible at the moment, governments can still gather the right people, those who would negotiate and implement risk reduction, and talk through past experiences, technical evolutions, how perceived risks in one area might be being reduced, could heighten risks in another area, and other topics as well. Every country has had to manage nuclear risks, whether that's unilaterally, bilaterally, or multilaterally. So everybody has a story to tell. And sharing best practices transparently helps us all learn what to do better. That's the role of the P5 process. It's not a negotiating forum, but it can help flag interest, explore perceptions, and serve as a launch pad for more results-oriented efforts. So what should the P5 focus on even in the next year, 2-3 years? First, they absolutely should be continuing risk reduction discussions, but with more specificity. For example, the P5 could do a stock take exercise on crisis communication practices. They could map interaction points between P5 counterparts, identify which governments, entities manage crisis communication links, identify how and why governments have upgraded their crisis communication systems in recent years, explore historical use or non-use cases of crisis communication channels, and also look at actual 21st century nuclear crisis or conflict scenarios, either involving the P5 or not, highlighting the gaps and vulnerabilities in the current architecture. They can also look at how EDTs could undermine resilience of these channels. This may seem like a no-brainer to everyone, but it took several months for the P5 to even agree on an email distribution list this cycle and what could be shared on it. This is, especially as an American and British expert, it's quite frankly embarrassing. Second, I think the P5 need to intensify discussions not only on risk reduction, but also doctrines. We need the right people in the room at all times from all delegations, diplomats, military planners, and defense officials. But it also needs to be a reflexive exercise. The P5 should move beyond just formally briefing one another by piloting doctrinal exercises that allows each P5 delegation to test assumptions, clarify ambiguities, and understand thresholds for use in practice. The goal of this would be to create a space for deeper, more mutual understanding of doctrines without pressuring any of the P5 to revise or negotiate new positions, while also building long-term habits of mind that support more transparency. Third, I think that we should build on the previous glossary work led by the Chinese in a new way. I think the P5 should identify terms warranting deeper discussion, not with the goal of consensus definitions or to produce a new edition of the glossary, but to unpack meaning and implications, historical usage and evolution of terminology, things that actually could be used in future risk reduction protocols or arms control agreements. This would encourage internal reflection within each P5 system and promote shared vocabulary building without the burden of consensus for the sake of it, or for the sake of just having a new glossary. Lastly, I think the P5 really need to dedicate some time to technological foresight. For example, the P5 could create a track that is looking at the strategic implications of artificial intelligence. The P5 need to be talking about how new AI applications are affecting decision support, adaptive targeting, strategic warning, and more, and Philip is going to be commenting on this. The goal of this would be to avoid norms that are contentious with some P5 members. For example, Russia has said that it will not join the other 4 counterparts and commit to maintaining a human in the loop. So this would help create space for long-term thinking, open up the space for looking at how technologies are going to affect strategic stability, and bring more technologists into the conversation as well. So these are just 4 ideas in the immediate term that I really want the P5 to focus on. They stay within the remit of what they have agreed to discuss in this cycle already, and it builds a little bit further and it deepens the discussions in some specific ways. Also, Nikolai will be talking about the recommendations from our paper, which then brings some of those ideas into the more medium to long term as well. So to close, I just want to say we must see this work as an ecosystem. Government, civil society, industry, the private sector, we all have a role, so let's get to work. Cool.
Great start. Thank you so much, Sahil, for highlighting the responsibilities and the necessity to move forward and to kind of touch different points, what success could look like in this rather difficult time, and how to increase also mutual trust with, for instance, shared vocabulary. Next, we will hear from Nikolai Sokov. He's a senior fellow at the VCDNP in Vienna, and I'm sure many of you have followed his distinguished career over many, many years. Great to have Nikolai here with us to provide the overview of the paper and to highlight its medium and long-term recommendations. And particularly great to have you here because 2 years ago, it was you who proposed to me to go in that direction and commission that study. So that's wonderful that you come to New York for this, even though you don't like to be so much to be in New York. Over to you.
So yes, thank you very much, first of all, to the Swiss and German foreign ministries for supporting that very important kind of project. Well, it's very hard to summarize it. The paper is actually very dense, but right there at the entrance, you'll find the title pages with the download link. So yes, I very much encourage you to read it. Although I'm not a fan of New York, there's something proper actually about me speaking here, because the first time I talked about arms control, disarmament, risk reduction was in fact just across the hall in conference room 4 almost 40 years ago. I was making a statement on behalf of the Soviet Union. At that time I was still a diplomat. That was a time of optimism. Nuclear weapons were being reduced by thousands, yes, and I'm really proud that I had a role in that, being part of negotiations on a number of treaties and regimes. And the risk of nuclear war was declining almost by week. I would not have actually thought then that nearly 40 years later I'll be speaking in the same building, in the same part at least of the building, talking about the elevated danger of nuclear use and the need to do something to reduce its risk. So it's quite sad, actually. Well, I'm fairly old, and the end of my career is not very optimistic, I'm afraid, but I hope that still some lighter times are ahead. Let me start actually by saying that the past system of risk reduction that was born during the Cold War was a good system, and it worked well, but unfortunately it's outdated. Yes, and it no longer meets the requirements of the 21st century. Yes, and we now feel that quite acutely, I think. During the Cold War, we were concerned about the World War III, large-scale war that would break out right away and would be extremely devastating from the first few hours, right? Today, we mostly face the risk of a limited conventional confrontation that would quickly escalate, yes, and might even involve nuclear use. During the Cold War, we were primarily concerned about avoiding the risk of a large-scale nuclear strike with thousands of weapons used at the same time. Today, the risk is about conventional, actually, conflict and about limited use of nuclear weapons. But limited is not good. It's not, well, we cannot tolerate even a single, actual nuclear explosion. So we must try as hard as we can to avoid even that limited. By Cold War standards, all key states today, in fact, yes, I'm sorry if I offend someone, but I think that all key states today and their allies are more risk-prone than was the case during the Cold War. I remember very well the times of the Cold War when key states, especially the United States, Soviet Union, tried to stay as far away from direct conflict as possible. Today, that's not exactly the case. Today, so many states think that the limited direct confrontation will not escalate, or think that it's okay to use nuclear threat in the context of a conventional conflict. Something that was unheard of then. So the threats, the challenges, and the dangers are today, well, at least in my view, and yes, I've been working in this area for more than actually 40 years. I started as an academic at first. I think that the risk of nuclear conflict today is actually higher than was during the Cold War. Maybe with one exception of the fall of 1983, all right. But otherwise, I think it's still higher than even then. The existing risk reduction system does not address the majority of weapons that may be used in regional conflicts, both conventional and nuclear. The current risk reduction system does not address the majority of contingencies, and the communication links are not sufficient to quickly de-escalate conventional conflicts, limited conflicts between key states. So yes, it was a good system. Nothing wrong with it, but it's outdated and needs a major overhaul. We should not dismantle the old system, no, but we need major upgrades. Once again, we have plenty of recommendations in the report. I very much encourage you to read it. A brief just notes just to outline. Generally speaking, the risk reduction system consists of two main elements. One is communication links that allow direct communication between government in time of crisis. And the second part is confidence-building measures to reduce the level of tension by enhancing the transparency and predictability. And our study does address all the key elements. we proposed a network that would connect at the first stage at least all the P5, and in the future expanded to other nodes. Say India, for example, NATO headquarters, you name it. And should be able to connect, should enable every member of the network to connect with individually other nodes or to all of them simultaneously. The quality of the network is very important. At the very least, it should be the same as between the US and Russian nuclear risk reduction centers, and it's actually a really great study that you've done Catalink. It would really fit extremely well into the requirements that we see for such a system. 24/7, very much protected, standard protocols so that it could work smoothly. Second, confidence building and notifications should be expanded. The old system does primarily concentrate on strategic ballistic missiles. That's really not nearly enough today because, in fact, the most dangerous contingencies now exist at the level of the region of theater. Once again, lots of details in the paper, but just let me note here that we do propose notifications about launches of both ballistic and cruise missiles with the range above 300 kilometers, but also plenty of other actual measures. So very, very thorough kind of notification regime to avoid any kind of risks and misperceptions and concerns. And the third element, which has never been there, but I think we need to consider it, we need to change the attitude to risk reduction. Well, you know, when you look at discussions today in the P5 or in other international fora, you'd think, okay, so I can make a concession to other kind of states, so on, to engage in risk reduction. That's a wrong, I think, attitude. We do take sour medicine, not because we make a concession to the doctor, so yes, but because it's about our health and our life, right? So, so everything about that matter is, in fact, in self-interest of states. We need a new risk reduction culture. So let me emphasize that. We talk about the culture. We have the nuclear security culture, this culture, that culture. We do actually need the risk reduction culture. It's the first and foremost that really means that you start communicating, you start asking questions, and even more important, you provide clarifications and data before you act. That should become a habit. You communicate before you act, and you communicate openly and try to resolve misperceptions before they emerge. Now, risk reduction does have benefits, but also has limitations. Yes, and by the way, yes, I fully actually support what you just said. It does not remove the risk of an intentional conflict. So we only talk about unintentional. Well, that's nonetheless very good, yes, and we do need kind of to pursue lots of other measures. So we just need to understand the limitation for risk reduction specifically. It's not a substitute for arms control. No risk reduction measures do affect military postures and so on. Yes, they can just enhance the transparency. Yes, and that's very good to clarify intentions. But for capabilities, we do need arms control. And risk reduction does not actually need trust. Yes, that's very, very important, I think, element. You don't have to trust someone. You don't have to agree on what the risks are, in fact. well, is just enough to accept some risks do exist, yes, and try not to put kind of fingers, yes, so to cooperate, you don't actually need to point fingers, you don't need to agree on the sources of the risk, but at the same time, as you work on risk reduction, you can increase some trust, well, at least to a limited degree. Paradoxically, the limitations of risk reduction make progress more feasible. You don't need to change military postures, you don't need to change operations of the military, and so on and so forth. So domestically, much easier actually to make such decisions. Such decisions will be much less controversial, both internationally and domestically, because they do not touch a lot of interests that would be otherwise at play. So yes, it's a limited, useful, and more feasible kind of endeavor that we propose. We cannot expect the P5 or just international community in general to seriously engage in thoroughly rebuilding the system right now. We often talk about shared interest. Yes, we do have the shared interest, but let me note that the shared interest has been there all along, for decades. The problem is that shared interest is never enough. To act, you also need a political decision. The political decision is much more difficult to come by. So I would say that although we cannot actually make a political decision right now, yes, it's a time of conflict, we can nonetheless do something useful and important, and that would be to start a technical consultations at the level of experts. I do expect that political decision on upgrading and enhancing the risk reduction system will become possible maybe in the year 2 or 3. But it would be really great if by that time we already had some agreement on the technical side of risk reduction, on communication links, on possible notifications regime, and so on and so forth. And here let me recall one example from the test ban history. Back in the late 50s, there were negotiations between the United States and the United Kingdom and the Soviet Union on the test ban. Negotiations were completely deadlocked. Delegations went to Geneva and just repeated exactly the same statements. At the same time, technical work was still proceeding. So as long as these discussions continued, even under the conditions of a complete deadlock, once the political decision was made, right after the Cuban Missile Crisis, it became possible to very quickly conclude the first treaty on test ban in 1963. So 2 lessons from that still apply today. One, you need to keep the link. You need to keep talking. And 2, you do need to conduct technical work so that by the time when you finally have the political decision, we can move swiftly with that matter. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nikolai, for presenting the paper and for highlighting the changing context, the requirements of the 21st century, the need for a new risk reduction culture, and also to show how technical work can create political will that is needed in addition to the shared interests. And that brings us straight over to our colleagues from IST, and I'd be happy to pass the floor to Sylvia. She's the Deputy Director for Nuclear Policy at the IST, at the Institute for Security and Technology, where she leads the Institute's work on the Catalink project. Sylvia will present this innovative hotline initiative, and I think it's one of the most concrete, most promising ideas out there. Sylvia is uniquely positioned to explain what makes Catalink distinctive, how the system functions or would function, why it could play a key role in this evolving strategic context. Sylvia, over to you.
Thank you, Reto. Good afternoon, everyone. My colleagues over here very eloquently shone the light on the importance of nuclear risk reduction today, and within the broad nuclear risk reduction framework, the important piece of effective crisis communication. I'm really excited to present to you all our work that we do at the Institute for Security and Technology on the Catalink initiative. But before I speak, I wanted to contextualize why it is important for us to really talk about effective crisis communication channels. As we speak today, two nuclear-armed states in South Asia, India and Pakistan, are once again caught in escalating tensions following a terrorist attack in Pahalgam in Kashmir on April 22nd. As a countermeasure, India has suspended all existing confidence-building measures and treaties with Pakistan, like the water sharing agreement that India and Pakistan has. However, despite reports of escalating conflict and cross-border firing that we have been seeing for the last 1 week, one critical channel remains open, which is the direct line between the Directorate General of Military Operations between India and Pakistan. That is the only CBM that has not been suspended. And this is to showcase and underscore that communication lines serve as a crucial mechanism for maintaining dialogue and potentially de-escalating tensions. Nuclear-armed states locked in crisis understand that, and this really underscores that the fundamental truth that even during crisis, nuclear-armed states recognize the fundamental importance of maintaining open channels of communication. Given the very real risk of nuclear escalation and deliberate escalation that we see today through misinterpreted rhetoric, action, or even for that matter, miscalculation, we at IST are advancing the Catalink initiative. It is our 21st century response to the idea of hotlines that are internationally driven, secure, resilient, and it has the potential to avert nuclear catastrophe. It is essential to underscore how we came up with the Catalink initiative, and it was really a response for us to situate what we saw as a blind spot. Unlike the Cold War, which had only one bilateral conflictual dyad, in this 21st century, we see not only multiple conflictual dyads, but also a strategic chain of countries with overlapping interests and national security agendas. However, it is unfortunate that we are still relying on the relics of the Cold War model of crisis communication, which is just bilateral in nature. Given the multiple nature of nuclear crisis and overlapping interests, it is absolutely unacceptable, as my colleague Sahil said, it is unacceptable that leaders of nuclear-armed states do not have a multilateral channels of crisis communication. The lack of a multilateral channel of communication was our first key at IST which really augured us to look into what a multilateral nuclear crisis communication channel might look like. And then the second reason why we really honed into this idea of a multilateral crisis communication channel is something that you've been hearing throughout the last 3 days. Nuclear-armed states are modernizing and upgrading their nuclear arsenal. The massive nuclear modernization also touches upon NC3, which we know as the Nuclear Command, Control, and Communication. communication is one that underwrites all the other parts of the C3, and communication is one that lends credibility to a country's nuclear deterrence. Once communication gets attacked, and it is primarily one of the first things to get under or come under attack during a crisis, therefore, IST really took, and we did our homework, and to understand and respond to the evolving crisis where nuclear command, control, and communication, NC3 architectures, are being updated. However, there is lack of salience of research on the communication bit. And therefore, at IST, we have presented a novel idea which is tangible, which can be adopted by states, and we call it the CAT-link. The CAT-link system consists of 3 parts: a puck, a broker, and the rocks. I'll very quickly speak a little bit about the puck, the broker, and the rocks, but you're most welcome to also read more about it on our website. So the puck is a simple, secure, robust communication device. It is meant for dedicated communication between global leaders during, pre, and post a nuclear crisis. The broker, we see it as an interface between the puck and the rocks. Rocks it's a mouthful, but bear with me. It is the resilience omni-frequency crisis communication system which determines the path of the puck throughout the desired network. Now, rocks, which is the resilient omni-frequency crisis communication channel, is a permanently active global mesh network. The rocks uses multiple channels and wavelength to ensure that messages that are sent via the puck is transmitted through redundant networks for puck usage, especially when the threat environment is degraded. Now, I think it is important to hone in this point. We do not want the CAT-link system to replace existing crisis communication structures. The CAT-link system is designed to be additive in nature and to add on to the existing crisis communication channel, but with a focus on multilateral crisis communication. During, just before this panel, I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine, Andrew Faccini, and he mentioned, because we have done so much work on prototyping and building out the puck, in a similar iteration going forward, we should be able to do a puck demonstration where we send messages from a puck, which I would be handling, and send a message maybe to a colleague who is sitting in California. So I believe that kind of tech demonstration of what we have been able to do at IST would also shine the light how this is a concrete and a tangible example of effective crisis communication. I think Dr. Sokov's point is so well taken. At a time there is political stasis, there needs to be ongoing technical consultation on what we as states, as NGOs can adopt, and the CAT-link blueprint can be adopted by international states, especially the nuclear-armed states. To conclude, I would say as technology evolves, so are new and emerging technologies undermining crisis communication networks. One of the most important things that I have learned during my time working on the CAT-link project is that while states are unable to come to an agreement because of the lack of political unity, states are ready to hear technical solutions. So maybe we should seize upon that opportunity and further technical progress.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, for I think for showing us how important it is to maintain nuclear crisis communication, even nuclear communication links, even in times of crisis, and for presenting the system. I'm sure there are some questions in the room about the system, and you will have a chance to ask your questions later on. But first, we will turn to our last speaker, Phil Reiner. Phil is the CEO of the Institute for Security and Technology, and he has a distinguished career in the US government. And we work with Phil a lot, not only on nuclear issues, but also on cyber and on AI. And indeed, Phil will now bring us into the 21st century also in terms of AI, and he will talk about how emerging technologies impact the nuclear risk landscape, and how perhaps also how new technologies can be used to address such risks. Over to you, Phil.
Thank you, Reto, and thank you to both the Swiss and German governments for supporting the work we do at the Institute for Security and Technology, and particularly when it comes to the Cataling project. It's really an honor to be here, and I want to say thank you to all of you for choosing to be here in this conversation. I know you all have an incredibly busy week. So, as Reto said, I'm the CEO of the Institute for Security and Technology, and we're a West Coast-based think tank. I spend all of my time around emerging technologies, and we are convinced that the combinatorial effect of emerging technologies are going to radically alter our understanding of strategic stability and nuclear deterrence. But of these, it is our conviction at IST that the exponential acceleration of artificial intelligence is really challenging our ability to think about the world. And it really demands that we think about the future through an entirely different lens. It requires us to collectively and systematically think about what this means for nuclear risk reduction. And I'll talk a little bit as to why we are convinced of this. We also need to identify and understand novel risks that arise through the integration of artificial intelligence into these systems. And within this, as I think Sylvia has begun to allude to, I am the only thing that stands between you and asking Sylvia questions about the Cataling system, so I will be brief. But it really highlights the salience and the necessity for secure crisis communications. It really cannot be overstated. In light of these novel technological advancements, I think crisis communications are actually more important now than they ever have been before. So, what is the current landscape? What does it mean for crisis communications? In the recent past, we know from reporting out of Israel's ongoing war that technology increasingly is creating what is referred to as a human bottleneck. What that means is that military targeting from AI systems is happening at such a scale and so fast that humans can't make decisions fast enough. They can't move fast enough with what the AI is telling them to do. And within the same context, where concerns have arisen about automation bias, where reports have emerged that Israeli forces are only giving minimal human oversight to what their Lavender AI targeting system is telling them to do. So I raise this not to start a discussion or debate about the ongoing crisis in Gaza, but to highlight what I think are the significant implications for the future of warfare. On one hand, we see advanced AI algorithms that can process infrared signatures and radar data to provide faster, much more reliable warning of potential attacks. This has broad implications for early warning and for nuclear command and control systems. We also see new AI capabilities being developed for command and control systems to expressly provide courses of action, COAs, to military commanders in the United States, much like what we see in the Israeli context today. Additionally, as most nuclear-armed states have embarked on their massive nuclear modernization programs, AI is being integrated into strategic decision support systems. The U.S. Stratcom Commander, General Anthony Cotton, has said publicly, we are developing artificial intelligence-enabled human-led decision support tools to ensure our leaders are able to respond to complex, time-sensitive scenarios. For the first time in 2025, we saw the U.S. Stratcom posture statement state, U.S. Stratcom will use AI/ML to enable and accelerate human decision-making. There are numerous other places where AI is likely to be integrated into nuclear command and control systems. Not just indicators and warning and COA development, but intel fusion, comms path determination, adaptive targeting, strategic planning, and more. While such advanced capabilities could potentially reduce false alarms by better distinguishing between actual threats and perhaps sensor anomalies, the nature of complex AI systems, I think as everyone in the room is aware, raises concerns about the quality of data, the trust that one puts in these complicated systems, and the predictability of them in extremely high-stakes environments. In a recent workshop that IST conducted in Washington, D.C. that was focused on the integration of AI into NC3 systems, it was also noted by a former senior leader in the United States that leaders are still going to want to be able to speak with each other in these moments of crises. In such volatile scenarios, the absence of reliable channels or the inability of leaders to engage bilaterally or multilaterally would absolutely prove catastrophic. And I agree with how Sahil characterized it. It's just unacceptable. There is, of course, the chance that AI has the counterintuitive impact of increasing decision time and increasing decision space by providing intelligence, by creating COAs, and providing other decision support tools faster than what we can do today, by being able to more rapidly convene those who need to make a decision, by ensuring the effective routing and distribution of commands. Perhaps AI can actually give decision makers more time to grapple with these sorts of crises. However, the more likely scenario is not only further compressed decision timeframes, but what I think is much more important, which is the disruption of the key elements of nuclear deterrence: credibility, signaling, and survivability. Each of these factors is currently ensured by today's global NC3 systems. AI's role in NC3, however, will alter our understanding of all three of these elements, which thus demands that we think systematically about their implications. When warning times shrink, when signaling mechanisms have been fundamentally altered, when survivability is in question, and your credibility is undermined, traditional human-centered communication channels can be one of our most vital mechanisms to pull back from the brink. AI is thus fundamentally challenging the status quo. New approaches to crisis communications really requires an accounting for these technological realities and for us to adapt to changing times. This makes crisis communications amongst leaders an incredibly pertinent step for nuclear risk reduction. Finally, I want to also strongly concur with Sahil's call for collaboration. The Catalink project in particular, that Sylvia is here to answer all of your questions about, this is an international project, and it cannot succeed without participation from a broad range of stakeholders. So we look forward to your joining us in this effort, as well as combining forces with IST as we work on understanding the implications of AI in NC3 systems and what it means for nuclear risk reduction. And thank you again to Reto for having us here. It really is an honor.
Thank you so much, Phil. And it's been incredibly important to hear from you and to understand how fast and how deep the change is, and how AI in the NC3 domain will heighten risk in so many ways. And thanks to all six speakers for their contributions. I would now like to open the floor, give you here, the audience in the room, an opportunity to ask questions to the panelists. When you speak, please introduce yourself briefly, and I think I'll take a couple of questions from the room and get them back to the audience. Jackson, I see you are the first.
Thank you, Reto, for convening this salient and also sobering conversation. My name is Jackson DuPont, and I'm with the Council on Strategic Risks. Historically, track 1.5 and 2 dialogues between nuclear weapon states, and also with participation and facilitation from non-nuclear weapon states, have been indispensable for socializing a lot of the technical ideas presented here today, as well as creating the confidence and hopefully foundations for more track one dialogues. And anyone can take this question. In this moment of rapidly changing technological landscapes, what do you see the role for track 1.5 and 2 dialogues to meet this issue? And how can states parties assist and facilitate these conversations in a productive manner that helps socialize some of the ideas of which you share today? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackson, for this first question. I take another one if I see one. Yes, there in the back. Hope we can hear you. Maybe you could go forward so that our online participants also understand your question. Please.
Thank you, Reto. My name is Florian. I'm with the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. I wonder if risk reduction is really only a matter of the nuclear armed states, or what role countries like Switzerland or Germany could maybe also play in helping to reduce these nuclear risks. So the question goes to the panelists, but maybe also the facilitators. Thank you.
Thank you, Florian, for this important question about the role of non-nuclear weapon states in this debate. I see a third one, and then I'll get back to the podium. Please, you have the floor.
Hello, Rishi Paul, Senior Policy Fellow at the European Leadership Network. I think it's a great project and an exceptionally good paper. But I was just wondering, how do you define a nuclear crisis? Whilst it's easier to discern drivers, what it engenders is very different between the nuclear armed states. I mean, for example, does it comprise of loose talk, mention of nuclear weapons during a conflict, changing nuclear doctrine during a war, meeting of nuclear decision makers and it being publicized during conflict? I think this is important because for a military planner, nuclear strategy is about perceived certainty, strategic certainty. So to borrow a famous line from Dean Acheson, eyeball to eyeball, the other person who blinks first loses. And for hotlines, this could be especially problematic for a military planner because if it's utilized too early, it can undermine deterrence credibility. Now, this isn't necessarily a consideration for a policy planner, but for a military thinker, it absolutely is. And just to follow on to the Catalink, I was just curious if you could say more on how it manages deep fakes. So take, for example, the British nuclear deterrent Trident uses command and control. It's an NC2 system. So it uses analog, high frequency, low frequency. So the problem of deep fakes is not really problematic. But for something like Catalink and for military, for political alliances, it could be problematic. Just only a few years ago, it was reported in the UK that Lord David Cameron, the former British Prime Minister, he thought he was speaking to a former Ukrainian leader, and it turned out to be a deep fake. So I was interested in how Catalink can overcome this. Thank you.
Fantastic. We have really a good first set of questions here. I will have to ask panelists to be fairly concise in light of time, also because we might want to give additional opportunities for questions. Sahil, do you want to start, and then maybe everybody picks a part of the questions that are on the table?
Okay, I'll be very brief. For Jackson's question on the value of track 1.52 dialogues, the value is that there is no track 1 dialogue on these topics. So there has to be track 1.52 dialogues on AI and how it's affecting strategic stability. We've got a little bit of US-China AI dialogue happening at the moment, but it's not enough. We really need technologists in the room, similar to how we had scientists and technologists come together during the Cold War and afterwards to work through these questions, because every single technologists from different parts of the world will come to the conversation with a different perspective. It's like speaking different languages. Everybody codes differently. Everybody approaches technological problems differently. So we really do need them all in the room together. Second question, very quickly, on the role that non-nuclear weapon states can play? Well, you see it here right now. This is exactly the role that they can play. They can fund work. They can bring people together that the nuclear weapon states maybe can't, including experts from nuclear weapon states. So it's a huge value. And just lastly, on the deepfakes, which I'll leave largely to Philip and Sylvia, this is a massive issue. We've seen multiple world leaders answer prank phone calls, mistaken counterparts through other lines of other communication lines. It's a big issue, but Catalink is radical in its simplicity, and that actually helps a lot with its security, which the others will be able to speak to more.
Thank you so much. Turn it over to Nikolai for equally brief
Yes, I'll try to be very, very brief. I was on track 1.5. That's a very, very useful, actually, channel. Yes, I've been to many track 1.5 meetings on both, actually, sides. On track 1 and track kind of 2. So anyway, when you mix them together, well, it usually helps a lot. Yes, and I can say that unlike what you actually said, when you bring together technical experts from different countries, they tend to find common language much faster than diplomats. Also, I've seen that myself multiple actually times when we could not negotiate something, then we'd bring in technical people from defense like enterprises. I was on both kind of sides. Yes, and I would say, it's a piece of cake. So I really think that it's important to have people like that in the room. And non-nuclear states, which in partial response, can do a lot, actually, to facilitate the channels of this actual kind by first and foremost providing great expertise out there. You don't need to have nuclear weapons to contribute to risk reduction, disarmament, and arms control. So yeah, absolutely. On nuclear crisis, there's a big difference between public signals and private signals. What you referred to at first was actually public kind of signals. Yes, that's part of deterrence, and deterrence is not really about the military. So it's about affecting the minds of decision makers on the other side. And the military are actually largely outside, in fact, that kind of process. So it doesn't really interfere with military planning. The problem is when you make public statements, it's usually more like of a threat. So yes, and you need actually some private kind of channels to start to reduce kind of tensions. So I fully would agree that, of course, yes, the reliability, the fact that you must know who calls you, and the fact that no one actually listens to your conversation is an absolute actually must. So yes, that's one of the key kind of tasks. And I think that both actually papers completely would agree on that kind of element. We do need highly reliable channels, yes, and I now defer.
Yes, and as we turn over to our team from the IST, I wanted to add to the non-nuclear weapon states role the question: should non-nuclear weapon states be integrated in a crisis communication architecture? Perhaps you can also address that one when you go on when you answer the deepfake question and other technical questions. Please. I don't know who wants to go first.
I'll go first and then turn things to Sylvia. I think on the track 1 and track 2 conversations, I think one of the best compendiums of all of the track 1s and track 2s between the U.S. and China, Concordia has put together, and it's a very, very long list of AI and military-focused track 1s and track 1.5s and track 2s. That helped contribute to the U.S. and China under the Biden administration actually getting to a point where they could talk about very powerful AI systems and how to control for risk. We'll see where that goes under the current administration, but absolutely track 1.5s and 2s are happening. Are they talking about the specific issues that I raised? Not so much. It's a very sensitive set of issues to talk about in C3. Would it be useful? Absolutely. In terms of, I'll kind of skip past the other questions. I think they've already been answered. On Catalink, very easy answer. So as has been alluded to, it's meant to be an incredibly simple code base, an incredibly simple device. This is way too complicated to secure, right? And so you make it such that there really is very little to hack. And when it comes to deepfakes, you prevent the voice deepfake through PGP key exchanges between the two leaders that own the two devices. There's nobody that can actually deepfake it if nobody else actually has access to that channel. There's only one way you can get that message through, and it's through that key exchange. They literally would have had to walk into the prime minister or the president's office, hack into that device right then and there in order to bypass that sort of key exchange. So we've definitely thought about how to prevent that sort of, and it wasn't just David Cameron that's had this happen. It's been in South Asia and elsewhere. $25 million was stolen from a company in Hong Kong through one of these kinds of deepfakes, but we've kind of planned for that as well. In terms of how non-nuclear weapons states can play a role in the Catalink conversation, absolutely essential. I don't think this works unless you've got technical expertise and political buy-in from those who, as was mentioned at the outset, these sorts of conflicts are going to affect them too. So they've got to be part of the discussion and the build of what it looks like technically. Sylvia?
Just teasing off from your point, Philip, what has really helped us to also garner and galvanize momentum on crisis communication is the fact that we have political and financial support on the Catalink system from the Swiss and Germany. That has really helped us gain audience with other nuclear armed states and also non-nuclear armed states who believe that it is important to be transparent and puts back the onus on them to do more when it comes to effective, secure, and crisis communication. It is not enough to mention crisis communication in white paper documents and working papers, but go beyond that. So once again, thank you to Switzerland and Germany, which really puts the focus on what non-nuclear armed states could do. Very quickly on the question on track 1.5 and 2, in our experience at IST, we have been really trying to get, every time we do a conversation on nuclear risk reduction and artificial intelligence, we also always try to bring in our technical experts. In the last couple of years, it has gotten easier to get the industry folks in the room because there is a widespread recognition that these industry members are building and contributing powerful AI systems which are getting integrated in weapon system, and that has implications and ramifications for the global order. And therefore, it is of essence that not only we advance track 1.5 and track 2s, but also be intentional when we are doing the track 2s. Great question, Rishi. Philip has answered, but one thing that we've tried to do is ensure end-to-end encryption when it comes to the puck. And the puck device is only designed to be carried by leaders of state. And up until now, we have only looked at it as a text messaging system. So the audio, so we kind of mitigate the threat of deepfakes when it comes to the audio video. But again, even I understand that there could be implications when it comes to text messaging. But because again, as at IST, we work under the operating principle that complexity is the enemy of security, and therefore the Catalink system is designed to be radically simple, and text messaging is one way to ensure that we mitigate some of the risk of deepfakes that we are seeing with other channels of communication.
Thank you so much. Before we take a second round, briefly to Susanne for additional points.
On a combined answer on questions 1 and 2, I do think that nuclear weapon states both have an interest as well as a role in keeping the momentum on reducing nuclear risk and in also keeping the nuclear weapon states, and we could even say the nuclear possessor states, because risk reduction is a concept which is not only privy to the P5, but which should be a request from all countries with nuclear arms in keeping that discussion, in keeping the momentum and keeping nuclear weapon states responsible for giving answers and explaining what they do. So that's the first aspect. The second, I think the role of non-nuclear weapon states becomes even bigger if we turn to emerging technologies, because the original risk reduction discussion was, of course, a discussion, and still is, which requires also privileged and classified knowledge of systems which are only systems belonging to nuclear weapon states, while with the new risks emerging, these are already proliferating, and not proliferating is maybe not even the right word. These are owned by much more countries, and the risk. So non-nuclear weapon states could actually create risks to command and control systems, although they are not nuclear weapon states. So it's really important also to remind ourselves of the responsibilities which arise, for example, by the use of artificial intelligence, cyber space, etc. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Susanne. I'm looking around. There's another hand that kicks off the second round. Please be very concise also in formulating your question.
I'll try. My name is Dr. Deep Shikha, and I go by Deeps. I'm the Executive Director for the Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy. And in this position, I'm also the Director of the UN Office for International Association of Lawyers Against Nuclear Arms. This has really been fascinating. Thank you to all the panelists. I was really intrigued by the comment about this being a multilateral communication system, and then to link it to, the first is a comment, and I'll follow up with a question to what Rishi just talked about, deepfake and the interception of the conversation. And I think you made the argument that it's going to be more direct, leader to leader. But if it's multilateral and deterrence or risk reduction is about signaling, then there could be disruptions with other channels or multilateral communications that doesn't involve the two leaders that are perhaps talking about the threat, but there could be signaling or deepfakes related to perhaps other players. So that's just the first comment. My question now is with regards to, you mentioned South Asia, a region that I'm originally from. I'm also happen to be the first South Asian woman in this position. And with what's happening in the region currently, my question was, we've seen this kind of a risk reduction, confidence building right after the nuclear weapons test in India and Pakistan in 1998, which was followed by some confidence building measures such as the Lahore Declaration, which soon then was followed up with the Kargil War a year later. So if you could share a little bit on what you see as the fallout of those confidence building measures, or perhaps one of the challenges to risk reduction in such high volatile situations. And then for Nikolai, I have a specific question. You talked about there's some sort of an agreement in the perception of risks and not so much in the sources of that risk, and that's not so important. The perception agreement is perhaps more important, but it seems in India and Pakistan's case, the disagreement is about the sources of risk, and then perhaps that sort of escalates the tension in the region. So if any comment on that would be great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. We have I think we have time for one more. Please be concise. Then I turn it back to the floor.
All right. My name is Mustafa Kibaroğlu. I recently joined the Turkish Foreign Mission in Vienna after 3 decades of academic career with Nikolai Sokov in Monterey. My question specifically to Mr. Reiner, because I believe we live the good days still with the AI, because all experts working on AI keep telling us that AI will take control next 3, 4, 5 years. So what kind of track 1.5 or what track 2, or will it be a track 0? Because if AI start, building their own data and using their own data, they will not even consult with us, the humans. And what kind of an international security situation you're anticipating? Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have Deep Shikha's question, and we have this question addressed to you. You guys want to start? Kick it off.
Deeps, I would respond to your question by borrowing from Ambassador Julien Thöni, and he said, risk reduction measures is not optional, it is essential. I believe national security planners in India and Pakistan understand that, and that's why the Directorate General Military Operations channel is still open, and because the hotlines are open, we can hope that in case of there is nuclear escalation in the coming weeks and months, that we see cooler heads would prevail. I think the important piece is the crisis communication channels being open, and hopefully it continues to be so and it is not rolled back. With regards to your question on how, like, the multiple nature of having different state leaders have it, yes, we have considered that, and the idea is that it is going to be there is going to be secure end-to-end encryption, and whilst multiple leaders having access to the code for the PUC does throw in some complexity, but we have also given thought that who within the president's and prime minister's office is going to handle the PUC. And for us to get to this question, what we have done is try to map out what are the specific use cases of the PUC usage and where it would be located within the PMO's office or the national security decision-making apparatus in each of the 9 nuclear-armed states.
So I think you asked, Deeps, I think you ask an incredibly complicated and difficult question. That's why I made Sylvia go first. I think, you know, in all of the time that I've spent working in and around South Asia, I want to just be very clear on the Catalink front that this is not going to solve the political problems that countries face. What it does, though, per what Sylvia was just saying, is it gives them something to fall back on. One of the things that we were so utterly struck by when you look back at the literature around managing nuclear operations, there's always a throwaway at the end of the chapter that says, we need something that's going to help us de-escalate. Somebody else needs to work on that. Well, that's what we need to work on. That's why Catalink needs to exist. So if something does happen in South Asia that they actually have a recourse to dial it down, it's not going to solve the political problem up front, though. Per the question on what starts to become a conversation around AGI, artificial general intelligence, where you've got capabilities that are arising from these systems that far surpass human understanding. That is a conversation that I would argue is nascent. It is only the beginning of a national security conversation around those capabilities, and we are way behind. I understand that has begun to be a conversation within the UN Security Council as of last fall, and it is happening in Track 2s at a very, very beginning level. But I don't think we quite understand what the implications are going to be, and we have got to do so with alacrity, because yes, it's a mutual threat. And I think that's actually what drove that agreement between Xi Jinping and President Biden, as to it's a mutual risk between states that AI is posing to us as a race, as a species, and we need to be taking it very, very seriously. Yeah.
All right. We have, I think, 1 minute each for both of you. We have to be really time concise.
Great. I'm just going to quickly, I'll take 20 seconds. Mike Tyson once said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. If a crisis hits, intentionally or not, how do we ensure de-escalatory behavior? You can have the communication lines, as Sylvia said, but how do we ensure they're actually used, right? And when we look at the India-Pakistan scenario, after the BrahMos incident, India did not pick up the phone and call Pakistan to explain what happened or to give any kind of explanation whatsoever. So it's one thing to have the lines, but it's going to take a lot more to get us to a place where countries actually utilize them, again, especially after somebody's been punched in the face.
Yes. Also very kind of briefly, I fully agree with Sahil. On this, you do need the risk reduction culture. Yes, that's exactly why I talked about it. Yes, and not just India did not pick up the phone. Yes, Russia actually did not pick up the phone for several months in 22. So yes, you need to pick up the phone, absolutely. That said, at the time of major conflict, you stop actually using the risk reduction, transparency, and so on and so forth. Actually measures because they do prevent signaling. But communication links do continue even during these actually times, because you do know that you might actually need to very quickly diffuse the crisis and take a step back. So we still actually have the communication link. So in the worst case, the two countries will still be able to talk to each other if it really comes to the worst. On the question about AI, yes, I just fully agree, and we're so much behind actually on that issue.
All right.
We need more talk.
Yes, indeed, we would need more time to talk about all these things. I would like to thank all our speakers. What is clear is that the momentum around nuclear risk reduction is growing, and we need to carry this momentum forward. Also in the NPT, in the lead up to the Review Conference 2026. Contributions like today are important, continued discussions important. I thank you all in the room, but also online, for engaging, and have a good day. Stay safe. Thank you so much.
Thank you.